even if this is not a joke, right? Even if he's being serious, which obviously he's protected under parody, but like, even if he was just like legitimately saying this, it would still be not legally enforceable because that's kind of the whole point of the fucking video.
Concerns the courts, the dignified palaces of justice, which during COVID brought us spectacular moments like this.
Mr. Ponton, I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings.
It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here, she's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I'm here live, I'm not a cat.
Perfect. You know a hearing's off to a shaky start when a lawyer has to clarify that he is, and I quote, not a cat. And I did not want him to uncat himself there. I wanted that man to spend the rest of the hearing as a photorealistic kitten looking like he just witnessed a double homicide. Specifically, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court, which is set to have a monumental year. Not only will it take on cases concerning the availability of mifepristone and whether Trump's immune from prosecution for his role in January 6th, it's also considering a case centering on something called Chevron deference, which I know sounds like the title of a spy novel that you'd burn through in an airport. But it's a vitally important legal precedent that says that when there is ambiguity in the letter of a law, courts should defer to regulatory agencies' expertise. Very basically, do you like it when the EPA regulates pollution or the FDA regulates drugs? Much of their ability to do that comes from Chevron deference. And if the court guts it, it'll be much easier for private industries to block government regulation. So this is going to be a huge year for a court that has seldom been more powerful, and yet respect for it has seldom been lower.
The court's public approval rating has dropped to a 50-year low, with just 18% expressing great confidence.
It's true, and it's hard to think of anything people have less confidence in right now, aside from maybe the window seats in Boeing planes. And there are understandable reasons for that, from the unpopular decision overturning Roe v. Wade to the fact that 1/3 of the court was appointed, sometimes under dubious circumstances, by a man who never won the popular vote. But the past year has also introduced us to a whole new reason to question the court's integrity, thanks to a steady drumbeat of stories like these.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is facing new allegations. He accepted luxurious vacations and gifts from wealthy individuals and didn't properly disclose them.
Politico reported Justice Neil Gorsuch sold property he owned to the head of a major law firm.
Justice Samuel Alito defended himself after he didn't report a luxury trip to Alaska and a private jet flight.
The report details that in July of that year, they stayed at the King Salmon Lodge and were served multi-course meals of Alaskan king crab legs or Kobe filet. They also enjoyed wine that cost $1,000 a bottle.
Now, Alito denies he did anything wrong there and specifically said if there was wine, it was certainly not wine that costs $1,000, which I hope is true for multiple reasons, namely that wine should never cost $1,000 because wine is not that good a drink. I'm serious. Think about the words people use to describe good wine. Complex? That's just a fancy word for confusing. Earthy? That's literally dirt flavour. And smooth? Your best compliment is that it didn't fight you on the way down? It's a bad drink. But the cost of the wine, which again should be zero, isn't the point here. The fact is, stories like those have further undermined public trust in the court, which is a big problem, because it's an institution that relies on respect. It can't enforce its own rulings, and without public buy-in, it could theoretically be ignored. Chief Justice Roberts himself recently wrote, "Public trust is essential, not incidental, to our function." So these scandals are a huge issue for it, and given that, tonight, we thought we'd look at how deep this court's problems go and a possible solution that might go 1/9 of the way towards helping things get better. And let's start with a striking fact, because when it comes to what ethical rules the court is required to follow, there basically aren't any. Congress can impeach a justice in extreme scenarios, but short of that, the court essentially regulates itself. And that has happened in the past. In the 60s, Justice Abe Fortas was involved in a number of scandals, including taking money to advise a businessman who wound up having a case before the court. But despite the fact that getting paid for outside work was legal and that Fortas both returned the money and recused himself from the case, the mere appearance of impropriety caused lawmakers of both parties to call for his resignation, and he stepped down, saying that he was doing so for the good of the court. And just a few weeks later, the US Judicial Conference unveiled a new ethics policy for federal judges, with just one tiny exception. See if you can spot it.
The United States Judicial Conference today issued a code of ethics which forbids all federal judges, except Supreme Court justices, from accepting fees, gifts, or compensation of any kind for off-bench activities.
Yeah, the Supreme Court justices were exempt, so that new rule solved every problem except for the one they just had. And there have been multiple tweaks to the Code of Ethics over the years, with the one constant being that the Supreme Court justices are not covered by it. And even laws that apply to them are basically unenforceable. The argument is that because they are the highest court in the land, there is no one they can answer to. Now, over the years, the justices have noted that they voluntarily follow certain rules. For instance, they're required to report any gifts worth more than $480. That is how we learned about Ruth Bader Ginsburg receiving a $4,500 opera costume, Ketanji Brown Jackson receiving a floral arrangement from Oprah worth $1,200, and Antonin Scalia receiving 2 firearms and $950 worth of dictionaries, which is slightly weirdly phrased because $950 worth of dictionaries could either mean one very luxurious dictionary or 120 regular ones. But while those gifts were disclosed, others haven't been. Scalia had a habit of not disclosing trips that other people paid for and actually died while staying for free at the hunting lodge of a business executive whose company had recently had a case before the court. And I bet that executive...
That's my favorite. Big L for the lodge, by the way. Having your fucking guy that you're greasing up dying. You sure that was a coincidence? Yeah. Yeah, it's just, they greased him too hard. Yeah, it happens. It happens. Can't take that one back. Can't really put that down as a tax write-off, you know?
Was very glad that he got the ruling before that very fun-sounding visit. And as we've already seen, some justices have run with that precedent. Remember Alito's fishing trip? When it came to light, he said that he didn't think the rules required disclosing it and attempted to justify the free private jet flight with a laughable argument.
Alito explaining that on that private jet flight, he was in what would otherwise have been an unoccupied seat.
Oh, come on! Alito is considered one of the sharpest conservative legal minds, and that's the best he's got? Of course, if you hadn't been in the seat, it would have been empty, Samuel. That's not so much a defence of your behaviour as it is an explanation of how seats work. Also, it's a private jet. All the seats are otherwise unoccupied. They don't overbook them like it's the 505 Spirit Airlines flight from Myrtle Beach to Vegas. And that feels ethically dicey even before you learn that one of his hosts on that trip was a hedge fund manager whose companies have since had 10 cases before the court. And that's not a one-off. For years, Neil Gorsuch had been trying unsuccessfully to sell a 40-acre piece of property that he co-owned in Colorado. But coincidentally, just 9 days after he was confirmed, he managed to sell it. And while he did disclose that sale, he left the identity of the purchaser blank on the form, which isn't great, because it turned out to be the chief executive of one of the nation's biggest law firms, which has since been involved in at least 22 Supreme Court cases. And if you're wondering what that weird sound is right now, I'm pretty sure it's the ghost of Abe Fortas going, "Are you fucking kidding me? Are you kidding me?" But the biggest offender on the current court is unquestionably Clarence Thomas. If you are unfamiliar with his work, I truly envy you. But very quickly, he's an extreme originalist, known for adopting hard-right positions years before other justices come around to them, from overturning gun laws to undermining the Voting Rights Act. He's also questioned whether poor people have a right to a lawyer, saying the Constitution only guarantees you the right to hire a lawyer, not to have one provided for you. And he once said that black civil rights leaders bitch, 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 moan and moan, whine and whine. And sure, why can't the people fighting for basic equality just have the chill, good time vibes that we all associate with Clarence fucking Thomas? He's so fun to be around. Ask almost any woman who's ever worked for him.
Or, well, Harlan Crow probably has a different perspective on how fun Clarence is around, how fun it is to be around Clarence Thomas. I'm just saying. the women I don't think appreciate a fine horse porn aficionado. Oh my God. I just realized something. Clarence Thomas, also another horse porn guy. Oh my God. Horse porn is a big part of the big part of our political conversations lately. That's crazy. That's wild. No shot you're making that up? Nope. What's up with the Clarence Thomas horse porn thing? Clarence Thomas had a clerk work under him, famously, that he sexually harassed. Her name was Anita Hill. She mentioned that Clarence Thomas would regularly bring up the types of porn that he was interested in watching, which included, but was not limited to, horse porn. Among other things. Yep.
For years, there have been stories about Thomas accepting lavish gifts, but things escalated recently with a series of ProPublica investigations revealing Thomas's relationship with these 4 conservative billionaires.
The report says the 4 moguls collectively treated Thomas to 38 destination vacations, 26 private jet flights, plus an additional 8 by helicopter, a dozen VIP passes to professional and college sporting events, 2 stays at luxury resorts in Florida and Jamaica, and 1 standing invitation to an uber-exclusive golf club. The dollar value likely in the millions.
Just one of those vacations was a 9-day Indonesian super yacht voyage that, if he paid for it himself, could have exceeded over $500,000. And the way ProPublica tracked down some of those trips is pretty great, because the host of that Indonesian vacation and multiple others was Harlan Crow, a billionaire who's given millions to efforts to move the law and the judiciary to the right. Crow liked to give out commemorative polo shirts for the trips that he took people on, so ProPublica just started looking at the shirts Thomas was wearing in photos, which helped them uncover some of these trips. And look, journalism is a crapshoot. Sometimes you spend weeks hunting down leads, painstakingly building a timeline. Other times, your target posts a photo of himself on Facebook wearing a T-shirt that says Secret Undeclared Yacht Vacation 2003 and gives the whole game away. Those reporters also tracked down photos and cards that Thomas's wife Ginny sent to friends to commemorate their trips with fun captions like 5 couples ready for river rafting. The Sokals took 4 lucky couples to the first Nebraska football misspelled game of the season. And this photo of a Trump administration attorney and his wife, captured Mark and Tricia Paoletta, sang a special tribute to...
Also, Ginny Thomas is a unique nutso, too. Ginny Thomas is also fucking insane. But I'm sure he'll get to that, too.
Clarence they created. And every single one of those photos looks like it was on the mood board for Get Out. But wait, because I'm still not done. They also found this photorealistic painting that Harlan Crow commissioned of one of those vacations, featuring him, Thomas, Leonard Leo of the Conservative Federalist Society, and a statue of a Native American man seemingly praying for lightning to strike this exact spot. But if you're thinking that that is the worst piece of art that Harlan Crow owns, you are mistaken.
Published reports say Dallas tycoon Harlan Crow's controversial collection includes Hitler's notorious autobiography Mein Kampf, signed by Hitler, oil paintings by Hitler, and linen napkins embroidered with the Nazi swastika. The collection is housed at Crow's mansion in Dallas. "I can't get over the collection of Nazi memorabilia," said one guest who saw the Nazi treasure trove. "You sort of just gasp when you walk into the room."
Yeah, I bet you do. Because that is a bit of a red flag, specifically this red flag. Now, Crow says his controversial artifacts are part of a collection meant to preserve a part of our history and to understand how we all got here. And I'm guessing...
Bro, I loved Harlan Crow's defense for it, which was basically that, like, you know, he just loves history and he hates Hitler. Brother, you got the signed copy. Oh, man, I'm just, I'm reading it and I'm shaking my head disapprovingly every time. Yeah. He loves history as much as I love the top of the hour ad break. And what I mean by that is I do love it. Here's a 3-minute ad break now. I don't have a good segue for you. I'm sorry, I'm eating.
His guests ask that exact same question when they see his signed copy of Mein Kampf for the first time. How the fuck did I get here? Though bad news for Harlan about at least one of his Hitler paintings. An expert has since deemed it definitely not authentic, which I guess he probably should have seen coming, as it was signed A. Hitler and not The Hitler. Crow has also repeatedly flown Thomas out on his jet for trips to the Bohemian Grove, the California retreat for the rich and powerful, where he and the Koch brothers apparently developed a bond. Here is Thomas with one of them and Ken Burns for some fucking reason. Thomas has also incidentally attended Koch donor events at least twice, serving as a fundraising draw for an organisation that regularly brings cases before the court.
ALEC is the fund that the Koch brothers created, which is one of the worst, like, groups out there as far as think tanks that write legislation and bring issues forward that absolutely guts any kind of labor protection we have.
Now, his excuse for not reporting any of this was that he sought guidance from my colleagues and others and was advised that this sort of personal hospitality from close friends was not reportable. And while it is true the judicial guidelines have an exception for personal hospitality, experts will point out that means dinner at someone's house, not a 9-day, all-expenses-paid yacht trip. A pretty good rule of thumb is, if it could be a prize on The Price is Right, it's not personal hospitality. And Thomas has received more than just hospitality anyway. In 2014, one of Harlan Crow's companies bought a string of properties in Savannah, including Thomas's childhood home, where his mother still lives. Crow also reportedly paid for 2 years of private school for Thomas's grandnephew, who apparently Thomas has raised as a son, and which, based on the tuition rates at the time, amounted to roughly $100,000. Neither of those were disclosed at the time either, and it gets pretty hard to square the lavish vacations, the real estate, the tuition, with Thomas's insistence that he's an iconoclastic voice for the little guy. In appearances like this one from 2 years ago, where he thanked the people who'd shown up to support him during his 1991 confirmation hearing.
The regular people showed up, and it was always us against the elites. And that's the way it has been for the last 40-plus years I've been in public life. Us against the elites.
Oh, I get it. So the 38 destination vacations were just part of your us versus the elites plot, right? Lull them into a false sense of...
It's pretty funny that these guys, like, there's so many people who think I'm like Clarence Thomas. You know what I mean? Without ever thinking about, like, what I advocate for, what I do. Bro, this man is the elite. I'm not even the elite of Twitch, okay?
Security, then presumably on the 39th vacation, vive la révolution! I love it, what a plan! But that sounds like horseshit even before you see that this is how that talk started.
I'm sure you and all of us want to join thank Harlan Crow and his family for making this wonderful facility available to us. I know Harlan hates that.
I know.
So I knew we had to do it.
That's why I wouldn't say it.
I knew we had to do it.
I like to keep that friendship.
Oh, I bet you would. I'm sure friendship is definitely the thing that you like the most about knowing Harlan Crow. Not the lavish yacht trips or the private jet flights. It's the simple human companionship of an aging Nazi napkin collector. But perhaps the item that perfectly sums up the distance between Thomas's regular guy persona and his high-end tastes is his motorhome. It is his prized possession. He even showed it off during his 60 Minutes interview.
One of his passions is this 40-foot-long motorhome that he and his wife use to explore the United States in their downtime.
You find this relaxing?
Oh, yeah. It's away from the sort of the meanness that you see in Washington. You get here with just the regular folks, and it's so pleasant.
I can see that. You know, people in Washington can be so mean, can't they? I've heard some even make decisions in landmark court cases that loosen gun regulations, limited affirmative action and strip women of their constitutional right to an abortion. So I get the impulse to want to get out of town to avoid those fucking sociopaths. Thomas loves his motorhome so much, he could actually be a bit of a snob if asked inaccurately about it.
One of you enjoys traveling cross-country with your spouse in a 40-foot RV? Who's that?
Well, that's technically incorrect.
It's not an RV.
It is a motor coach.
Is that bigger than an RV?
Well, it could be, but it is a better vehicle than an RV. An RV is normally built on a light truck chassis. A motor coach is a tour bus. I mean, it's old, but it's really...
This is why I said that the highest degree of being a debate lord is being a Supreme Court justice. Lawyers are debate perverts. Supreme Court justices are debate pedophiles. Basically, the debate pope.
Nice.
Honestly, if Thomas hadn't caused so much human misery, him liking big, comfy trucks that go vroom, vroom would be genuinely charming. Every man in his 70s has picked a vehicle that occupies way too much space in his brain and heart. Some like trains that go choo-choo. Some like boats that go glub-glub. And others love motor coaches based on a non-light truck chassis. And I'm not saying that these men love their vehicles more than their families. It's just, it's easier for them to say, I prefer O-scale trains because historically that's what this country's finest model trains have been since the 1800s, than, I'm proud of you, son. But about that bus, it is apparently the Rolls-Royce of motor coaches, a custom Prevost Marathon, or as Thomas himself once put it, a condo on wheels. And if you're thinking, that's a pretty big purchase for a Supreme Court justice to be able to afford, about that.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has been an RV evangelist for decades, traveling the country in a 40-foot luxury motor coach that he purchased in 1999 after borrowing more than $250,000 from a wealthy friend. But a new report from Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee alleges Thomas's friend forgave a substantial amount of that massive loan, and 9 years later, his friend forgave all the debt.
Well, that sounds like a sweet deal. Honestly, it's starting to feel like Thomas doesn't so much have friends as a collection of human ATMs. And his wealthy friends will say there is nothing to see here. They're just doing for Clarence what they would do for anyone else.
It's so funny that this guy, who would definitely not allow you to fucking have your student loan debt forgiven, obviously, has so flagrantly violated, like, every fucking normal rule, every normal code of conduct. And this is barely scratching the surface. Like, he is comically corrupt. How is he not in jail? Asks a chatter. Brother, he is a Supreme Court justice. He is the jail. He is the jailer. Like, openly, he's above the law. When you get to a certain level of debate pedophilia, you basically are above the law. He's at that level. It is funny, though, that it's so, like, flagrant It's so flagrant and so obvious. Like the corruption is like, this is some shit that you see in like, this is some shit that the American government would write a press report about like some Latin American country that we want to do a coup at.
Harlan Crow pulled that exact move.
In a statement, Harlan Crow, the Dallas real estate billionaire who picks up the tabs for the trips, says he and Thomas have been friends since 1996. Writing, the hospitality we have extended to the Thomases over the years is no different from the hospitality we have extended to our many other dear friends.
Okay, but it is different, though. Because while you may have been friends with Clarence Thomas for a long time, you didn't start being friends with him until 5 years after he was made a Supreme Court justice. In fact, each of his 4 major benefactors appears to have first met Thomas after he ascended to the Supreme Court.
Wait, that's crazy. How does that work? Wait, what? Surely that's not weird.
Which is inherently telling. Even socially adept high schoolers can figure that out. If Brenner, Jackson, and Ashton only start hanging out...
To think this motherfucker wanted to be a Black Panther, supposedly? Oh, no, he was. Clarence Thomas is a really interesting individual because his politics are, like, indecipherable, even for those who pay close attention to it. Clarence Thomas early on is, like, a Malcolm X fan. Is, like... he's a Malcolm X fan, wants to be a Black Panther, and then he reads Thomas Sowell. This is something that he openly is unashamedly admitting, by the way. He reads Thomas Sowell. He's also very like, he still is a bit of a Black separatist. It's really interesting because he's just like, not, he obviously leans on the side of white nationalism and white supremacy quite a bit, but he is not a white supremacist, I would say, even though his decisions are white supremacist almost all the time. And it's really interesting. It's really interesting that he is a Black separatist with a white wife who used to be a Black Panther. He is a Black nationalist, yes. And then Thomas Sowell basically red-pilled him. He also was like extremely cynical about white supremacy, I think. He's extremely cynical about white supremacy and therefore thinks that like liberals, yeah, he's a pessimist. He thinks that like liberals are just as racist, which is true. And therefore it's more like get your money up, not your funny up. Like he personally is. No, I wouldn't say he's like an accelerationist. Yeah, Thomas basically believes that anti-racism is doomed to fail, that Black people need to rely on themselves to get ahead, and he got his. Yeah. It is a perversion of Black excellence and talent to 10th theory from Du Bois and then combined with Booker T. Washington. Thomas is just a bootstrap Andy? Yeah. Obviously, Thomas Sowell is the classic, like, neoliberal capitalism will bring about prosperity for Black people, and that the problem facing Black people is actually that they haven't gotten their money up hard enough under capitalism, and all of the other structural hurdles that Black people face are actually false. Racism is made up for the most part, that kind of thing.
Out with you after you get a job at Cold Stone. It's not about you, it's about the free fucking scoops. And thankfully, there is a way for a justice to avoid the appearance of impropriety, and that is recusal. Any justice is required to disqualify themselves in any proceeding where their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. But, as with everything else you've seen tonight, for the Supreme Court, it's essentially just a suggestion.
Oh, yeah, he also hates affirmative action because he thinks that because he thinks that he is a beneficiary of affirmative action, but says, like, I'm not a beneficiary of the false notion of affirmative action, despite being a beneficiary of affirmative action. So he has a reactionary slant against affirmative action as well. And says, like, look, I didn't get here because of affirmative action. That's why it shouldn't exist. Like, it basically is, it basically is I think, weird insecurity that he has as well.
The justices themselves decide if they are able to be impartial, and those decisions cannot then be appealed. And even when it comes to recusals, Thomas is an outlier. He almost never recuses, even when he clearly should. Take one recent case where he had a flagrant conflict of interest, albeit not a financial one, because the court recently took up a number of appeals involving cases surrounding January 6th. And as it happens, a major cheerleader to overturn Biden's win was Thomas's own wife, Ginny, as her text to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows show.
In one, Thomas writing, quote, "Help this great president stand firm, Mark. Biden and the left is attempting the greatest heist of our history." And in another, just days after the 2020 election, Thomas writing, "Do not concede."
On November 24th, Meadows wrote Thomas, "This is a fight of good versus evil." Thomas replied, "Thank you. Needed that. This plus a conversation with my best friend just now."
Wow. I will say, Ginny Thomas looks exactly like a person who would try to speak to the manager about a presidential election. But despite that conversation with my best friend line, Ginny...
He has made an argument against race mixing and miscegenation, but he's made a legal argument that would also factor in miscegenation into the equation, yes, which is obviously ironic for, I mean, you know why it's ironic. He has a white wife, so.
He insists that she never talked to her husband about the election challenges, which is a bit weird, because he says this a lot.
It's a particular honor to be here with my wife, Virginia, who's totally my best friend in the world. Love to spend time with my wife, who's totally my best friend in the whole world. I love being here with my bride, Virginia, who's a gift from God and my totally best friend in the whole world.
OK, first, if Ginny is indeed a gift from God, I guess it's nice that Clarence Thomas got at least one gift from someone who is not a billionaire. But also, it would seem that either Ginny Thomas was keeping her husband up to date on her ongoing coup attempt, or she's Clarence's best friend, but he isn't hers. And that is rough. There's going to be a lot of awkward silences on their next motor coach trip. But the fact is, a justice's wife inserted herself into efforts to overturn the last election, yet in multiple cases involving January 6th, Thomas did...
He also wrote the opinion that fundamentally fucked the American education system, stating that states can discriminate in funding schools based on how poor they are, aka the amount of minorities that are there, and that good education is not a fundamental right. Yeah, he's really, really, really fucking gross. I mean, every single Supreme Court justice that's like right-wing. I mean, I despise Antonin Scalia from the first moment that I learned about, I think it was like what shocked me to my core was, I think, taking a constitutional law class in college, finding out that in a dissenting opinion that Antonin Scalia had, one, brought up 24 in an effort to fucking justify doing torture, literally 24 the TV show, in a hypothetical scenario where what if there was a terrorist like in 24 that wanted to nuke an entire city, Jack Bauer is of course going to torture him, and then two, made inferences that allowing during the Obergefell decision, or I think leading up to the Obergefell one, I can't remember, he said that in his dissenting opinion, he said that allowing gay people to marry one another would open up the door to people marrying dogs. It's actually pretty funny to think about because, are you saying that's not a valid argument? No, it's not. It is pretty funny to think about because it's once again reaffirming the long-held position that I have, at least, that these people in positions of power are not actually smarter than you. They're not. Some of them might be a little bit more knowledgeable, but when all is said and done, many of these people are not inherently smarter than you. They're not actually particularly smarter than you at all. They're just fucking weird, gross freaks who are just as not knowledgeable as you are.
Didn't recuse himself, even in one concerning whether White House files, which could have contained more of Ginny's texts, had to be handed over to the January 6th committee. In that case, Thomas was the lone dissenter saying that they should remain secret. And if that is not a conflict of interest, I honestly don't know what one is. But look, the fundamental corruption here might be bigger than anything one recusal could cover. Because I'm not saying that Thomas is only voting the way he is because of the trips and the gifts. His opinions were horrible before he ever set foot on a yacht. But that doesn't mean those billionaires haven't had a real impact on him. Because for years, Thomas repeatedly talked about money. In the 1980s, he told a reporter he planned to be rich and said that that means more than just a few $100,000 a year. But unfortunately for him, that's exactly what being a Supreme Court justice currently pays, just under $300,000. And he's been pretty
broke boy
vocal about his dissatisfaction with that, sometimes even publicly.
The job is not worth doing for what they pay. It's not worth doing for the grief, but it is worth doing for the principle.
You sure about that? Because your job is writing opinions in a bathrobe and it pays 6 figures. Most bloggers do that for free and they don't get to enjoy seeing their worst takes become everyone else's law. It was right around that time in the early aughts that Thomas reportedly said to a Republican member of Congress that unless he...
Wasn't Ruth Bader Ginsburg good? Fuck no, man. Oh, my God. No. The worst thing that one of the worst things that Ruth Bader Ginsburg did was also refuse to retire, even though she was old as fuck and had cancer like 13 times. And then fucking died while Trump was president. She sucks. Just as selfish. She was just as selfish as any of these other fucking weirdos. Sure, affirming equal protection for women, good. Yeah. Well, she's a woman. She was out to get her bag as a woman, I guess.
It gave Supreme Court justices a pay raise. Quote, one or more will leave soon, maybe in the next year. That set off alarm bells in conservative quarters. As that lawmaker Thomas spoke...
How many POC law clerks did RBG hire? I think that same number is the same number as the amount of people that were arrested in Canada for misgendering trans people. 0. Or I think it was 1. It might have been 1. I don't want to get it wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was 0. What do you think about Ketanji? I think Ketanji Brown Jackson is actually decent with her bona fides, with her qualifications. You rarely ever have someone, I don't think there's ever been someone of her background that has been in the Supreme Court. However, ultimately, I'm not a believer that any kind of she only had one African American, but other Asian, Hispanic. Yeah, she had one black clerk. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did. But I don't believe that. I don't believe that any Supreme Court, no matter how liberal, will actually align with workers. Their position is designed to not do that. But yeah, I think it's like her background as a former public defendant gives me a little bit of confidence that she will be more, she will have like a pet issue basically in criminal justice reform. But the court itself is already like hyper right-wing, obviously. It's designed in an incredibly reactionary way to have a right-wing supermajority. I don't know. I don't think that she will do anything that's good.
spoke to recalls it, his importance as a Conservative was paramount. We wanted to make sure he felt comfortable in his job and he was being paid properly. Unfortunately for Thomas, justices' salaries haven't been raised beyond inflation since then, but it may not be a coincidence that a handful of billionaires have suddenly stepped in to make sure that Thomas was never anything less than extremely comfortable. And in recent years, he seemed much less worried about his paycheck.
Right now, what is the compensation of a justice of the Supreme Court?
Oh, goodness, I think it's plenty.
Well,
it's not quite where you are, but it's... my wife and I are doing fine. We don't live extravagantly, but we are fine.
Here's a fun fact for you. That was in early June of 2019. Guess where he was at the end of that month? Crow's Indonesian yacht trip. That is the comfortable laugh of a man looking forward to a free trip and, fingers crossed,
He's like, yeah, bro, I just got back from Indonesia with my billionaire best friend on a $2 million or $500,000 trip. You know, famously ascetic lifestyle having guy is what I am.
free shirt to go with it. Basically, what I'm suggesting is it's not that these billionaires have paid Thomas to change his views. It's that they like his views, so they're paying for him not to leave, which is different, but not better. And if that was their plan, it has worked.
That's a really good point, by the way. This is one that I think should be stressed. A lot of people think, like, bribery works in the way where you're like, oh, well, it's kind of like the NRA. A lot of people miss the mark with the NRA. The NRA writes legislation, but the NRA isn't like bribing politicians to be pro-gun. America is very pro-gun, and the NRA is basically getting the also pro-gun politicians even more on board. Like, no fucking right-wing Republican politician is inherently anti-gun, and then the NRA gives them money, and they go, oh, yeah, now I'm actually pro-gun. It doesn't work that way. They wouldn't even be elected if they were anti-gun. That's the whole point. It's just, for Clarence Thomas and for right-wingers that get NRA money, for example, basically, the way this works is you get to continue having their support unconditionally in moments where maybe there is a little bit of anti-gun sentiment being expressed by the population. That's how you cause them to, for example, not push for legislation or vote on legislation that 90% of the country agrees on when it comes to gun violence. For example, 90% of the nation, which includes 75% of NRA card-carrying members, as a matter of fact, believe that there should be universal background checks. And yet, we have no legislation for universal background checks that has ever passed. Do you want to know why? Well, that's where NRA comes in. It's not to change people's attitudes in the legislative body. It's to maintain their position, maintain their consistency. Something to consider. Same with Clarence Thomas. They're bribing him because sometimes they will have, because he has obvious influence in the Supreme Court, 1/9 of the Supreme Court. So, like, they can bring cases in front of him. But he's not deliberating on these cases in any way that he normally wouldn't. The only reason why, I mean, he was going to deliberate that way anyway. So, yeah, there's like certain instances where you can actually make sure that you get like favorable court cases put in front of the Supreme Court and things of that nature. However, they're not bribing Clarence Thomas to assume these positions. He already has those positions. That's why he's a Supreme Court justice.
Worked. Because Thomas is now at the heart of the new Conservative supermajority on the court and has plans to go further. In his concurrence in the Dobbs case, he said the court should reconsider previous erroneous rulings on sodomy, birth control and gay marriage. And despite being known for the consistency of his views, there is one key issue on which he's evolved. Because remember that Chevron deference that I mentioned earlier? 20 years ago, Thomas actually wrote a majority opinion that expanded Chevron's protections. But since then, there's been a massive conservative push to get rid of Chevron, led by the Koch organisation. You know, Clarence's vacation friends. And a few years ago, Thomas renounced his earlier decision.
Notice he doesn't say miscegenation there. Yeah, that's why I said the principle behind like that dissent actually targets miscegenation as well. If he were to obviously target gay marriage, it would end up opening the door to targeting miscegenation under similar circumstances. However, he doesn't mention that. But it doesn't matter. Like, his advocacy would overturn Loving v. Virginia as well. So it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter that he's like making that argument. It's insane, dude.
Writing that he determined that the doctrine is actually unconstitutional after all. Now, what caused that change of heart? I don't know. Was it 15 years of marinating in right-wing money and vacationing with businessmen who could massively profit from it being overturned? We can't say for sure. But we can all think it together, can't we? Ready? Let's do that. 1, 2, 3. Yes, it's because of the money. Oh, shit, sorry. I thought it so hard it came out of my mouth. And look, I know we focused a lot on Clarence Thomas tonight, but this story isn't just about his integrity. It's about the courts. From the beginning, America, like most countries, was built on polite fictions by men who could somehow hold in their heads the idea that all men were created equal at the exact same time that they were drawing up the 3/5 compromise. And while we've shed a lot of those fictions, we still cling to the idea of the Supreme Court as a body separate and apart from politics. It retains a certain amount of mystique and ceremony. We literally put the justices on a pedestal and let them wear robes like wizards. In their confirmation hearings, they pretend to have no idea how they'll rule on hot-button issues, and we all have to pretend to believe them before we appoint them to a job that they can hold until they die. We don't treat them like what they are, which is people who can be motivated by ideology and greed like anybody else. But polite fictions can only be bent so far before they break. And right now, it feels like the Supreme Court is at a breaking point. And there are small ways to fix that, from a real enforceable ethics code to term limits to even potentially expanding the court. And honestly, if it were up to me, they'd also be dressed not in robes, but as Walmart greeters to emphasise they're not magic, they're humans like everyone else.
By the way, I just want to point... Oh, God. I think they should wear literally all of their sponsors, and so should politicians. I know that's like such a corny fucking dumb guy take, but I do think that real regulation should make it so that, yes, like NASCAR, you have to wear your sponsors if you have any kind of public appearance or any kind of public appearance in media, or if you are a legislator in general. I do believe that. Like, if you are an admiral, right, and you're going on CNN, you have to straight up have, if influencers have to say #ad, you have to literally say #ad. I have to thank Ubisoft for sponsoring the stream when I'm playing Skull and Bones. You have to thank Raytheon for sponsoring your appearance when you go on CNN to talk about how Ukraine needs HIMARS more than anything else. Raytheon. Obviously, the hilarity of the matter is that it wouldn't fit for many of the politicians. Like, there's just not enough space on their body. Their sponsor would just become conveniently named lobby groups. I mean, they are, but I'm telling you, they have to go into the PACs.
But if we're not going to do any of that, if we're going to keep the bar of...
Like who the donors are and shit, you know what I mean? Why are sponsors even allowed? I mean, sponsorships don't always work in the way that... it's not as direct as like Ubisoft paying me to do a Skull and Bones ad. Sponsorships also work in the field that I'm talking about with like admirals when they go and talk about how we need more weapons to be developed. When they're doing that at CNN, they're not directly at the payroll of Raytheon. They're oftentimes hired by Raytheon for a brief stint. Then they open up their own shop that does consulting for weapons manufacturers. And then they, every single person, by the way, every single person that appears on nightly news, every single channel itself is sponsored by the very same either lobbying groups in the form of ads directly bought on CNN, like ad slots, slash, like sponsorships in the form of like healthcare companies and whatnot. But then also every single person that appears on the shows that look like they are impartial, unbiased arbiters of truth, every single one of those guests that come on have either worked in lobbying of some sort, done PR or marketing for the individual sector at a certain point, or are being directly hired by that company at that time. Like whenever you see like a concerned parent, for example, on Fox News, that person is always from like Moms for Genociding Trans People or whatever fucking group exists out there. They're not a concerned parent. They're actually a person being directly paid by dark money to specifically dish out these talking points on television. That's why it's always funny when conservatives say like, oh, the libtards, they're paid actors. It's like, yeah, there are libtards who are paid actors. It's just that most of the Republican Party, every single Republican is also a paid actor. Yeah, a concerned AstroTurf parent that doesn't live in the state and usually doesn't even have a child.
Accountability this low, perhaps it's time to exploit that low bar the same way billionaires have successfully done for decades. And that finally brings us to the solution that I mentioned at the start of this piece, because Clarence Thomas is arguably the most consequential judge, and he's never really seemed to like the job. He said it's not worth doing for the grief. So what if he could keep the luxury perks that he clearly enjoys without having to endure all of that grief? Well, I think there might actually be a way to do that, because Justice Thomas, we have a special offer for you tonight. We are prepared to offer you $1 million a year for the rest of your life if you simply agree to leave the Supreme Court immediately and never come back. It is that simple. Just sign this contract, resign, and the money is all yours. This is not a joke. If you watch our show, you know jokes aren't really our thing. This is real. $1 million a year until you or I die. We have spoken to experts who've all told us that best they can tell, this is somehow legal, which seems crazy to me because it really feels like it shouldn't be. But as they keep pointing out, there are no rules in place to stop me from doing this. And let me be clear, HBO is not putting up the money for this. I am personally on the hook. You can make me really regret this. I could be doing stand-up tours to pay for your retirement for years, but this offer is not forever. You have exactly 30 days from midnight tonight to make your resignation effective. And if you are still on the fence, I actually have a little deal sweetener that I'm excited to show you. So please, come with me. Just come this way. Because we know you've got a lot on your plate right now, from stripping away women's rights to hearing January 6th cases you definitely shouldn't be hearing, to potentially helping roll back decades of federal regulations. And you deserve a break, you know, away from the meanness of Washington, so you can be surrounded by the regular folks whose lives you've made demonstrably worse for decades now. And the good news is, I think we can help you there, because since your favourite mode of travel might be in need of an upgrade, we are excited to offer you...
I'm not missing the best part. I already know this. I saw this on Twitter.
This brand new, top-of-the-line Prevost Marathon motor coach. Look at this beauty, Clarence. It's worth $2.4 million. And it's got a full bedroom. Yes, that is a king bed. 1.5 baths, a fucking fireplace, 4 TVs, a washer-dryer, and I quote, a residential-sized fridge. And if you're thinking, What will my friends say if I take this offer? Will they judge me as they sit in their boardrooms and mega yachts and Hitler shrines? Will they still treat me to luxury vacations and sing songs about me off their phones? Well, that's the beauty of friendship, Clarence. If they're real friends, they'll love you no matter what your job is. So I guess this might be the perfect way to find out who your real friends actually are. So that's the offer. $1 million a year, Clarence, and a brand new condo on wheels. And all you have to do in return is sign the contract and get the fuck off the Supreme Court. Talk it over with your totally best friend in the whole world. Because the clock starts now. 30...
Yeah, I saw Tim Pool was shitting his pants and crying about this. And about how this is illegal. And it's pretty funny. Because, brother, if it was illegal, Clarence Thomas would be in jail. And so would Harlan Crow. Like, that's kind of the point. Like, even if this is not a joke, right? Even if he's being serious, which obviously he's protected under parody, but like, even if he was just like legitimately saying this, it would still be not legally enforceable, because that's kind of the whole point of the fucking video.
days, Clarence. Let's do this. That's our show. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night. How is this legal? Your move, Clarence. Your fucking move.
Matt Walsh pulled the race card. Oh my God, dude. That's awesome. That's fucking dope.